The Dumping Ground Frauds. By Anna von Reitz. Information provided to H.E. Cardinal Mamberti and the Vatican Chancery Court regarding our claims March 6, 2005, January 19, 2023 in Seek. Imagine a situation where you could make all the money you wanted to make, tax-free, and never pay any operational costs? Never pay for materials, never pay for labor, just palm off all your debts on some other schmuck, order everyone around and rake in profit year after year, with no end in sight? This is the situation that has been enjoyed for over 100 years by all the offending municipal corporations and all their many franchises worldwide, and all of this was benefiting the parent corporations, which benefited the British Crown and the Vatican and the banks claiming ownership of the corporations and custodial interest in all our physical assets. With collusion from the banks, the perpetrators could borrow 10 times the value of everything in America as credit, spend it, force the taxpayers to pay portions of it back, use that as more credit, just like a credit card. Pay it down, spend that, pay it down, get a higher credit limit, pay it down. Get a higher credit limit, and so on, borrowing someone else's credit card and forcing them to pay the bill under the pretense of federal income taxes and property taxes and so on. They stiffed the American public for all their debts, including their bankruptcies, and in theory, they pre-indebted generations of Americans yet to be born, to pay off their mortgages and their property taxes and all their other expenses, while they kept the profits and invested them in things like the majority interest in all the Fortune 500 companies. It was by means of fraud and deceit that America became the dumping ground for world debt, and anyone who bought Federal Reserve notes could dump their debt on us, simply by setting up a national franchise, that is, setting up a British Crown Corporation franchise in the name of their country, and then setting up a Municipal Corporation franchise in the name of their country. So, for example, Canada could get in on the gravy train and dump its debts on America by setting up a Canada Incorporated franchise and a Canada Inc. franchise, and it worked the same way for all the other countries that got involved in this fraud scheme. Every time their national franchises had an expense, they could exchange it for what appeared to be American debt notes, even though the Federal Reserve is not American and never has been, and the Federal Reserve would simply pass that cost onto the Americans and charge it against our labor and land and other resources. The cost of the British Crown Corp paying mercenaries to illegally occupy all these friendly countries under conditions of deceit and non-disclosure was also charged off against us, while only benefiting the British Crown Corp and its franchises. This is also the rationale behind charging all the defense expenses for all these other countries against the American tab. Using the Federal Reserve note as the reserve currency in this racket allowed all these other member countries the ability to charge their debts off as if they were our debts, so the perpetrators in other countries all piled on, and kept their lips zipped and let what appeared to be our national debt climb into the stratosphere. Then, at the appropriate moment, the perpetrators pulled the plug in 2009, bankrupted their trademarked Federal Reserve System, dumped all that debt on us and against our assets, and sailed on, and it was all done with malice aforethought and the same kind of premeditated planning reflected in legislation by the British Parliament and the thugs running the Territorial Congress in the District of Columbia. Take a good long look at the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011 and one can see how the perpetrators planned to set up Joe Average American to steal everything poor old Joe had, and then call him a domestic terrorist, so the vermin responsible could justify shooting him and throwing him jail for resisting their illegal, unlawful, and immoral confiscation of his property to pay their debts. We are seeing a picture-perfect example of this scheme as the FBI and the private security forces, misrepresented as local sheriffs and deputies, are deployed against Ammon Bundy, whose property just happens to sit on land that Hillary Clinton purportedly sold, without any authority to do so, as part of the Uranium One deal. So one federal crime perpetuates another. No municipal corporation ever created received any delegated authority to say one word about our land, and the excuse that the Bundy property was part of a territorial states, that is, state of state, does not give the perpetrators any right to challenge the interests of the actual state enrolled retroactively to the date it entered territorial statehood under the Northwest Ordinance, one of the housekeeping tasks our American government took care of as of October 1, 2020. Throughout it all, the British Crown received 40% of the take, and Rome received 60%, whether it was profit from selling bodies via birth certificates or souls via baptismal certificates, selling heroin, or selling child labor contracts, or selling slaves, or collecting mortgages from people under false pretenses, or charging them taxes on federal income they never received, or life insurance annuities collected as life force value annuities, after genocide was agreed upon, or charging interest on a non-existent national debt. However, whenever, wherever, the split has been the same, 40% for the Brits and 60% for Rome. This reflects the special relationship that the so-called British monarch has had with the papacy ever since 1215 AD, with the British monarch acting as overseer of the Commonwealth, territorial estates and sitting on the chair of the estates, instead of the throne. This is just an overview of the criminality the worldwide banking system has supported and the reason that the Federal Reserve Note, an IOU, by any other name, became the reserve currency. It was based on unlimited access to American credit and the ability of foreign military district courts and municipal administrative courts to extract seemingly endless amounts of money out of the American workers in the form of labor taxes and property taxes and utility taxes and fuel taxes and taxes on taxes galore. These predatory commercial crimes were also based on deliberately devaluing the currency everyone assumed to be ours, via the silent tax of inflation, which has reduced the value of a USD to a fraction of 1 cent of a United States dollar issued in 1913, purloining our silver and gold reserves, renting out our labor and our land and our patents and performances for the unjust enrichment of the perpetrators and so much more. Most recently, the offending municipal corporation subcontractors have been trying to sell off large chunks of our natural resources, for us, like the Uranium One deal brokered by Hillary Clinton, and attempts to sell the Queen's tribute interest in our in-ground gold assets to China, and the entire port of Long Beach, California, to China, too. This whole fraud scheme was also based on operating under a cloak of secrecy, and never telling the actual American government what was going on at all these various meetings characterized as G5, and G7, and G20, conferences and with United Nations resolutions and treaties that these municipal corporation usurpers were entering into, for us with no granted authority, like the North American Union Agreement signed by George W. Bush, agreeing to merge Mexico, the United States, and Canada into one regional government. Since when does the president of a municipal corporation have any authority to mess with the national borders of his employers? Especially a municipal corporation that has no permission to say one word about our land or soil assets? We must assume that Mr. George W. Bush was counting on us to remain silent, but we have not been silent on that score. If the Postal Service wants to reorganize itself and establish regional offices, we could care less. That does not agree to nor authorize any change in our seat of government nor erase our national borders, which is the false claim at the heart of the current southern border crisis. George W. Bush was a criminal who never entered any public office related to us at all. Like his predecessors all the way back to Lincoln, he operated as an imposter, assuming authorities never vested in him, never accepting the liability or duty of the public office he pretended to occupy. It follows that neither he nor Joseph R. Biden, who is attempting to implement the so-called North American Union merger, have any right to tamper with our borders, and both men have acted in gross breach of trust and treason against our country and provided yet another example of the unlawful activities of the municipal corporations that have been housed in the District of Columbia, their fraudulent disservice, their criminal nature, and the justice of our claims. We wish for all these odious debts that have been created, for us to be erased and discharged as if they never existed, and for all those nations that have piled their debts onto us, thinking that our American government was in permanent interregnum and would never come back into session and reply to these offenses. Let them be ashamed and aware of the criminals who have done this and tried to make them and their countries liable for the expenses of foreign corporations in exactly the same way. We wish for the cancellation of any and all contracts entered into, for us by these criminals acting in breach of trust and violation of service contracts owed to us. We wish for the preservation of our national borders with other friendly nations and the happy recognition and acceptance of our historical and cultural differences. We wish for the immediate end of all external meddling in our business affairs and an end to any forced migrations of people from other countries into this country promoted by the offending municipal corporations, their franchises, or agents. Issued by Anna Maria Riesinger, Fiduciary. The United States of America in care of Box 520994 Big Lake, Alaska 99652. April 26, 2023.